Moving on, private sector's managers have been urged to support government institutions in improving infrastructure. This meant to help close the infrastructure gap across the continent and speed up bankable projects. The news unveiled at the first Africa50 General Shareholders Meeting hosted in Kenya. Julia Wino was at the event and now reports.
What we are actually covering today is Africa50, that is the General Shareholders Meeting, where we have different delegates from across the African continent who've actually come to Kenya for the very first time, majority of them for the very first time, to find a way, or rather discuss further in how the infrastructure sector can be improved in the continent's economy. And one of the major things that we've had as a discussion today is encouraging the private sector to come and be part of this great journey. And right about now, I am joined by Caroline Wainaina, who's going to give us a deep insight of what it means, first of all, for Kenyans, and what maybe they're going to tell the private sector in which what they can encourage the private sector to come and be part of this journey. Thank you so much for joining us, Caroline.
Thank you. Africa50 was actually called for by African governments because there was a recognition that governments alone would not be able to fill the infrastructure gap on the continent, and that, like in other continents, private sector can play a very important role. The African Development Bank was tasked with coming up with an innovative vehicle to attract institutional investors and other private sector funding into projects in infrastructure on the African continent. The reason why Africa50 is unique and uniquely placed to attract private sector is because it is actually an African-led institution. All Class A shareholders of Africa50 are African governments. Right now we have 25 African governments. We will be announcing a couple more this afternoon at our closed-door shareholder meeting. And we are looking to have all 54 countries of Africa on our platform as shareholders. We are the only entity that has African countries as investors and not as member states. So we have an independent investment committee. We operate commercially, and we've created the kind of environment that attracts institutional investors and private sector to come in and participate in projects in Africa for a decent return.
All right.
So Kenya is one of the founder countries, and today the president also announced doubling Kenya's contribution to Africa50 to 100 million, which makes them one of the key shareholders in Africa50. Right. So we're very proud of that, especially as a Kenyan.
All right. What does this journey mean for Kenyans so far? Like what kind of impact has this had to the Kenyan market since then?
Well, we are introducing ourselves to the market because although we currently have shareholding, we are only just starting to talk about projects in Kenya. So over the last few months, we have looked at a number of public-private partnership projects in the country. We will be participating in a number of transmission lines to be able to evacuate power because Kenya has done a very good job of generation, but there are still areas, for example, in the Western Kenya region where we need transmission lines to be able to evacuate that power to where it is most needed. So we will have a public-private partnership in the transmission space. We are also looking at projects in the midstream gas space, gas to power, and we're also looking at projects in the transport sector. So be on the lookout because some of these projects will be announced shortly.
All right. Now to my last question. So what is the main attraction that you're using to attract private sector to join the team?
So for private sector to invest anywhere, first of all, they want to see that they can achieve a decent return. They have choices about where to put their money. So in order for them to invest either in Africa50 or in projects that we can co-invest in on the continent, they want to see these projects are well developed, and then they will give them decent returns. Right. So Africa50 is actually well placed to develop projects to bankability. We have a fund that specifically focuses on bringing projects to bankability so that they can attract investments and financing into those projects once they are bankable. Secondly, we have a commercial investment team. Private investors want to know who they're giving their money and that it's in good hands. And then they want to see good governance and make sure that the investment decisions are made in a manner that is consistent with what they are used to. So because this is infrastructure, we are looking for what we call patient capital, for long-term capital. So we'll be looking for institutional investors such as insurance companies, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and others who can invest in infrastructure through Africa50, also co-invest with us in projects and can get a decent return as well as contribute to the development of the African continent.
Right. Thank you so much, Carol. Basically, this is coming at quite a timely place in Kenya, being that infrastructure is one of the government's big four agenda, and having the private sector is likely to promote economic growth in the country and also create job opportunities for young people. Back to you in studio.